Having just returned from Canada and the US, and with today being the first deadline for the submissions, I thought it'd be useful to provide a bit of an update. In the last 6 or 7 weeks, we've been throughout Asia, Europe, the US, Canada and the UK, looking at facilities that house part of the nuclear fuel cycle. The real aim of that has been to look at the cost, risk and benefit of our state participating more fully in the nuclear fuel cycle business. In particular, to understand the risks and the economic benefits of being part of that into the longer term. I've just come back from Canada and the US, where the real focus has been on understanding the framework established by governments to assure themselves of the safety of nuclear reactors and their operation. I've looked in that in both the US and Canada. We looked at the economic opportunities that this nuclear industry brings, and in Canada, for instance, it turns over about $6 billion a year and provides about 60,000 jobs. We've talked to those organisations that don't support nuclear fuel cycle about their concerns, and particularly concerns in the storage of nuclear waste and some of the operations of nuclear facilities. And we've also looked at new technology. What's happened since Fukushima? What changes have been made to reactor safety, and also to look at new technology. There are technologies called small modular reactors, much smaller, potentially less costly, potentially safely, but we'll have to have a look and see how they develop, because there are no commercial variants of that available right now. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Commissioner, what was it like to go through the Fukushima nuclear plant, and what's it like now? Have advances been made there?
Well, it just shows you what happens when you get it wrong. I mean, the countryside is deserted. It's still deserted. Industry and business just abandoned the site. And it'll be 30 or 40 years before it's cleaned up. So it's a salutary lesson about what happens when you get nuclear accidents. We need to understand what happened, why it happened, and we spent a lot of time in Japan talking with the operators, talking with the government organisations responsible for safety to understand why the accident occurred.
What will you be doing with the information now that you gathered overseas?
We now bring that information back, and we'll start to turn that into a report, the first of which will be available to the public in early February.
Did anything surprise you about storage over there or about the benefits?
I guess I'm always surprised when I go overseas. The extent of the industry, it's an enormous industry. In the US, I think $60 billion a year and 200,000 or 300,000 jobs. But also just the size of the nuclear industry, the size of reactors, the complexity of building them, the complexity of operating them, and how the industry has quickly developed a different technology to manage the problems that occurred in Fukushima.
What concerns did you hear about storage?
Mostly it's about the length of time that spent nuclear fuel's in the ground. And it is thousands, hundreds of thousands of years. And so we need to take that into consideration.
Can you give us an update on what's been happening with public consultation, community sessions, and what information you've heard from them?
Yeah, we've had someone in the regional field now for the best part of 2 months, going throughout the community. A sense of people are interested to hear what the issues are. They're interested to get more information. There are a core of people who are dead against this, and there are a core of supporters. I think our job is to try and provide that balanced information about risk and opportunity for the industry moving forward.
Given the economic benefits overseas that you've mentioned, what is the potential for the benefits here in South Australia, given our record high unemployment?
Well, this is a long-term industry. Nothing is going to happen overnight. If we decided, and we haven't decided, but if we thought to recommend parts of the nuclear fuel cycle, it would be a couple of decades before we started to see a major impact. But I think if you can look to Canada, they've been in the industry now 60 years, 60,000 jobs, $6 billion a year in turnover. There's a considerable benefit, but we're nowhere near recommending that at this stage. We're very much in the stage of understanding some of the new technologies. We will have to do cost-benefit analysis on each part of the cycle. We'll need to understand the demand for energy into the future. We'll also need to look at what opportunities might come for industry if we had less expensive electricity.
And submissions are closing today.
For the first issues paper, yes.
Yeah, so what's the idea about that if community consultation hasn't finished yet?
Well, the first part of the submissions is for us to gather information about what are the issues in terms of the full fuel cycle. So once we get those issues papers in, and the next lot are due to finish in early August, we'll then bring out the differences of opinion for the for and against. We'll have a series of public forums over 3 or 4 months where the community will be engaged to draw out those issues, to understand what the differences are, and to try and bring some facts and evidence to the issues that we've been asked to report on.
Do you want as many people to come forward as possible if you have a view on this?
We're looking forward to get as many submissions as we can, and then from those submissions we'll draw out the people and the evidence that we want clarification.
The Greens have raised concerns that a JP is needed to sign off on some of these, saying that it does create a barrier for some people who to write a submission. What would be your response to that?
Well, I think this submission for a Royal Commission is no different than any other Royal Commission. If we are to give evidence, it is on oath. It's just that our Royal Commission, because of the breadth of what has to be done, we are taking our evidence in writing. So we need to assure ourselves that the people who are giving us evidence are the very people who say they are, and that they're attesting that this is their work and their evidence.
Commissioner, can you tell us how many submissions we've actually had so far?
90 today.
90? Is that including for all 4 papers, or just...
No, that's just the first submission.
The papers 1 and 4?
Yes, 1 and 4.
And for the other 2?
Well, they finish in...
3rd of August.
3rd of August.
Yeah, so you haven't counted that
No,
yet.
not
Okay. And will they all be made public, or in what form? Because you said you will publish
Yes.
the results.
Well,
So
assuming they're suitable to be published, and by that I mean language, content, they'll all be published. There have been some applications for some of the submissions to be confidential. And there are reasons why that would be the case, but I would think if someone wants to put in something fully confidential and we don't see a reason for it, then I won't.
And is it 90 unique submissions, or is it some where there's an organisation perhaps?
Oh no, they're a combination of individuals and organisations.
But they're not repetitive ones.
No.
Yeah.
That's the reason we asked for them to be signed off.
Did you have
A moment ago you spoke about the potential for cheaper electricity.
Mm-hmm.
Were you talking about within the nuclear fuel cycle, electricity may come down?
No, what I'm saying is that we need to look at the potential to attract industry if we were to produce less expensive electricity. It's one of the major inputs of the cost of doing business.
And because one of the sort of criticisms of nuclear is that it is actually quite an expensive form of electricity.
Well, and that's probably a valid criticism. One of the pieces of work that we will be doing, which will start shortly, would be cost each of the electricity generation methods. So renewables, the full cost of renewables, the full cost of coal, including remediation, and the full cost of nuclear power generation, including decommissioning.
Right.
And from that we will get a pretty accurate, a reasonably accurate estimate of the cost of generating electricity from each of those sources.
In terms of that full cost of coal that you're talking about there, when you were travelling overseas, when you spoke to some of the organisations, particularly in the US and Canada, in terms of nuclear's role in the climate change debate? Was that a major issue that you found?
To be fair, I was in countries that already had a nuclear program, and they saw nuclear being an important contributor to reducing carbon emissions. There's no doubt about that. And there is also a place for reducing those generation techniques that produce carbon. And certainly that's in the mind of the departments, the energy departments that we spoke of.
Okay. Today, the Australian Labor Party is beginning its national conference. Anthony Albanese has made a very strong statement against Australia at all being involved in any further stages in the nuclear cycle. You're working in the South Australian jurisdiction. Do you feel that you will need to, if you can convince, if you were to make a recommendation in favour of South Australia being more involved, that as well as convincing South Australia, you're going to have to convince the whole nation, and in particular the Labor Party, which is quite opposed to it?
If we were to move forward with a positive recommendation, then there is no doubt that there are federal regulations that need to be changed, as well as state regulations. And there would be no opportunity, in my view, without a bipartisan support, both at the federal level and the state level, to make the investment that would be necessary. So that's an issue that is for the political parties. My role is to write the report to set the scene for the future.
How would you describe the process so far? You said you know when you're making a recommendation so far.
Well, it's like drinking from a fire hose. There's a lot of information that's gathering, and we're all, this very small team, trying to digest it and try to make sense of the risk, the opportunity, and produce that in a form that's understandable so that the public is brought along in the process.
If at the end of the day you make a negative recommendation, that is, we continue with the status quo, would that have been such an enormous waste of your time and precious resources?
No, I don't think so. I think this state is challenged with its economic future, and we need to be prepared to look at all opportunities. And if this opportunity doesn't turn out, then it's an important indicator to the country and to our own state that we are prepared to look at the difficult issues, ask searching questions, and then move on to the next opportunity. So I don't think this is a waste, whatever the outcome is.
Commissioner, one more question. Where reference information that is put to you in submissions conflicts between submissions, how will you resolve those conflicts, and what is your evaluation process for conflicting information?
Well, if they are major issues, we'll draw them in the public debate. So we'll have the issues, and they need to be significant issues, but we'll draw both views out, and we'll attempt to understand why there is a difference between the views.
Thank you.
And we'll bring in experts to express those views.